At first glance, Mark chapter 12, 38 through 44 seems to be about those who are rich and those who are poor. Watch out for the teachers of the law, Jesus said. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. This was surely Jesus condemning those who used their religion as a means to gain wealth and power. Jesus condemned their extravagant way of life, their self-aggrandizing, and above all else, their total lack of compassion. The bit about devouring widows' houses needs some context. Back then, women had few rights, and a widowed woman had even less. If there were no sons to inherit whatever property was involved, it was not unusual for a man to have appointed some scribe or Pharisee to oversee their estate should they pass away. These men were expected, of course, to follow the scriptures, such as Exodus 22 through 24, which expressly says, "Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows and your children fatherless." Still, for some of these men, it was all too easy for them to skim off the top all that they could, eventually leaving such widows who were utterly dependent upon them and helpless to object, penniless and starving. This is what Jesus was talking about when he said that they devour widows' houses. They literally could do so legally, and they often did. This is the kind of behavior which Jesus condemns so strongly. These men will be punished most severely, Jesus said. And you can bet that the Pharisees and the scribes were listening, but not in a good way. The possibility that Jesus might somehow gain power just became highly consequential for them. Interestingly, the phrase used here by Jesus is the same one that he used in the parable of the sower, wherein he recounts how the birds come and gobble up the seed on the ground, and thereby prevent the seed from ever sprouting. Jesus knew that there were not only physical consequences to what they were doing, but that there were spiritual consequences as well. What they were doing was taking from the people without giving, and bankrupting the people both physically and spiritually. By taking too much for their services, they eventually left nothing behind. By making themselves and their power more important than being faithful to God, they were leading the people of God into spiritual bankruptcy. They truly were in the business of gobbling up the seed. This was a problem for Jesus, and so Jesus became a problem for them. In Mark's gospel, these words are then juxtaposed with the familiar story of the widow's mite. In that story, Jesus watched as rich people threw large amounts of money into the offering vessels, which of course was still an offering proportionately much smaller than the 2 small copper coins that were deposited by this poor widow. "Truly I tell you," Jesus said, "this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all that she had to live on." The 2 stories are likely connected. She was probably bankrupt because all that she once had was unscrupulously taken from her. Nevertheless, that is not really the point of the story. The point is that what she did was an act of faith. Put yourself in her shoes, assuming for the moment that she actually had shoes. Everything has now been taken from her. She has no legal recourse, and presumably no one who cares whether she lives or dies. And yet the little she had that she might have used for a scrap of bread that day, she drops into the temple offering instead. Why? Because there was nothing left in this world that she could hold on to, and no other recourse but to come to the temple and hope that God would hear her prayer and have mercy upon her. This was the price of admission. There, but for the grace of God, go you and I, right? Actually, it is worse than that. We are her. Spiritually speaking, all of us come to God with virtually nothing to give, just hoping and praying that God will hear our prayer anyway. None of us have any claim to righteousness which would stand up in some heavenly court. We are all spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are those who know that, or as Jesus once put it, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. While Caiaphas and his family plotted to make themselves richer in this world and stewed over Jesus' words of condemnation, this woman stopped trusting in this world to provide for her and put all of her hope in God that day. She invested the equivalent of a penny, trusting that God would take care of her and not knowing how. This is all about faith. The faith that the scribes and the Pharisees lacked, and the faith that this widow possessed. Faith is a living, daring confidence in God's grace, so sure and certain that a man could stake his life on it 1,000 times. So Martin Luther once said, and he did just that, trusting that if he spoke truth to power, that God would still protect him and provide for him, and God did. Fight the good fight of faith, George Whitefield once said, and God will give you spiritual mercies. And as Jesus himself said, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. Don't take that as some kind of promise for this life that you will somehow get rich quick. Just take it as a call to have an unshakable faith in the providence of God and to hold on to the belief that God will never desert you. When this world has failed to care, God will still care. When justice is denied, God will one day balance the scales of justice in the hereafter, if not before that day. And when all hope is gone, hang on. Just hang on. And give God the chance to fight for you, because God will. He will fight for you all the way to the cross for the sake of your soul. That is why Jesus came, so that you might be saved and live a righteous life. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Truth be told, neither success nor poverty in this life have anything to do with faith, and therefore they shouldn't really matter that much to us. The poverty of our neighbor or the widow next door, however, should matter greatly to us, because loving our neighbor is part and parcel of loving God. Following all of his commandments is what it means to love God, and that includes loving our neighbor. Jesus made it simple. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father. How do you know whether or not someone is truly a follower of Jesus? Anyone who does not love me, Jesus said, will not obey my teaching. I guess the word that comes to mind here when we consider the religious leaders in Jesus' time is hypocrisy. What they were doing was legal, but it was also immoral, and it was also cruel. There are situations like that even in our own time. Jesus calls us all to do better, and we can by his grace. And if and when the world fails us, Jesus calls us to hold on and believe that God still loves us. In our life, there are going to be times when we can help those who are hurting and those for whom justice has been denied, and there will also be times when that person is us. In both of these situations, it is all about having faith in God and doing what God requires of you in that moment is the only thing that really matters. Jack Benny was a vaudeville comedian back in the 1930s who had his own radio program and later his own TV show as well. He won an Emmy in 1959, and upon receiving this award, humbly remarked, "I really don't deserve this, but I have arthritis, and I don't deserve that either." That's a pretty good attitude to have in this life. Both the good and the bad will come our way. When it comes to God's grace, the same thing is true. None of us deserve it, but then we also do not deserve many of the other bad things that can and will happen to us in this life. But I believe that if in this life you love God and do all the good you can to help others, and you trust in the grace and providence of God to sustain you, then you will always emerge a winner in this life and in the life to come. Be safe, and God bless you.